How's it going, Rogues Gallery, and welcome to another Flesh and Blood video here on Red Zone Rogue. This is the start of a new series called Legend or Loss, where we rank and talk about the legendary cards and the fabled cards from the newest Flesh and Blood set, and whether or not we believe they are a legend or a loss. A legend meaning it is worthy of being called a legendary card, and a loss meaning, well, it's not. I am joined by my co-host, Dead Summer Art, and in the overlay, he's like down below me. How's it going, man?
Hello, it's going good. My name is Kale from Dead Summer Art. I am a Flesh and Blood lore creator. I make, I like to call them fairly highly edited videos that just talk about the lore and the flavor of Flesh and Blood, and yeah, that's basically what I do, so.
Yeah, and we're basically going to be judging these by our own criteria. We don't have a hard and fast set of things. We're going to be judging it in terms of like flavor, power level. What we're not going to be judging it by is monetary value. We do not care how much the cards are worth. We only care whether or not we believe they are worthy of being a legendary card, or fabled. We're going to be talking about the fabled as well. And so yeah, let's get started. You can already see here, the first card is Emperion Rapture, which is the Light Illusionist equipment chess piece from Dusk Till Dawn. Obviously, we're talking about Dusk Till Dawn today, because that is the latest Flesh and Blood set. And, yeah, I guess I'll start off with Emperion Rapture. I personally really love this card. I'm not entirely sure how much people are currently playing with this card in the new Prism deck, but I just think it is very cool on like multiple levels, and it is evocative of one of perhaps the most legendary cards in Flesh and Blood, and that would be like the Fiendo Spring Tunic, right? This card mimics it in a certain way that is both fun and flavorful for the class, and also, the art is just really good. I should note now that we're going to be judging all of the legendary cards, all the cards here, by their highest rarity version, because we want to give them the best possible chance to succeed and hit. Yeah, I kind of love that it forces the player into playing with heralds, you know? It's very, like, flavorful. And for me personally, I consider Emperion Rapture a legend. So that's a thumbs up for me. And Kel, what do you think of Emperion Rapture?
Yeah. So, I will ask, should we go through and read out exactly what the card does, or do you think people will be able to just sort of have a look for themselves?
They'll have the image up. They can see it here.
Sure. All right. Yeah. So, Emperion Rapture, I really do like this card as well. It's so for those who pay attention to sort of the patterns that LSS does when they make equipment, is that chess pieces, aside from obviously protecting you and sometimes having defense, chess pieces are almost always focused around resource production or cost reduction. And this card is just spectacular. I mean, the fact that anytime a herald goes into your soul, you're immediately going to be able to use the new Prism's ability to just immediately flip any figment that you then search out for free is such good value. Not all the time will you want to do that. Sometimes you'll actually want to just sit on a figment if you're playing, I guess, a bit more of a control type game. But if you want to flip it immediately and sort of apply more pressure on your turn, it's fantastic for that. The artwork as well is stunning. It's definitely like a lot of people's favorite legendary artwork from the set, and it just gives off this. It's just this perfect light illusionist vibe. It's this holier than thou, angelic, sort of display. I even went up and before this I looked up because I like the names of cards as well. I think the name is also a very important part of a card. Imperium stands for the highest heaven or heavenly sphere in ancient and medieval cosmology, usually consisting of fire or light, which just, it makes perfect sense for this card. LSS does a fantastic job at just naming their cards in general, for the most part. Yeah, and the fact that on top of its amazing ability to reduce the cost of your ability when a herald goes into your soul, you can give it Ward 1 in the event that you really need to block some extra damage, maybe towards the end of the game, or you just feel like you've gotten all of your figments out that you want to transform easily. It's just an all-round like star of a card. It's definitely a legend in my book. So
yeah, you mentioned the artist, and Soyame is actually one of my favorite Flesh and Blood artists, so it definitely gets like a Soyame boost. Yeah, I also love there's a little bit of flavor here in that the Emperion Rapture can actually be used to protect the angels that you put on the field, depending on how much damage you're taking, because this gets Ward 1, and you could make it so this gets hit before the angels do, so...
Yeah. Because I think with a lot of the angels that you'll be playing as well, if you're versing something like Runeblade especially, or maybe even Ninja with Kodachis, it is very easy for them to just flick little bits of damage towards you, which can then threaten destroying your angels. So Ward 1 is just like, yeah, fantastic. Yeah,
turns out the tiny little ninja daggers are the angels' like biggest enemy, right? Kodachis are pretty rough.
Yep.
Cool. So that is a legend from both of us for Emperion Rapture. I think that most people would have seen that one coming. All right, so the next card is actually Soul Bond Resolve. So Soul Bond, you know what? I started last time. I'll have you start this time. We'll alternate who starts in Legendary. So you can go start with Soul Bond Resolve.
The ability for Soul Bond Resolve is exactly what Bolton wants. I mean, at the moment, we've only got Bolton as our Light Warrior at the point that we're recording this, and I don't see another Light Warrior coming for a little while. Charging has often been referred to as one of the worst mechanics that you can have on a card or a need for your deck, just because it takes away cards from your hand, and cards equals obviously card advantage, but also resources that you can use to spend on your turn. So if you're losing a card, you're losing resources as well. And it also means that you need to keep cards in your hand whenever you're being attacked. Soulbond Resolve, just being able to charge on your opponent's turn, it's just really good because you don't want to have to spend a card to charge. Sometimes you just want to put cards into your soul without having to, spend a card to do so. And the fact that the first time you would be dealt damage each turn if you've charged, prevent one of that. It just means that this can oftentimes be blocking like a 3-attack card, even though it's got 2 block, as long as you charge when you defend with it, which most of the time you'll want to. I guess in terms of... There is something about this card, though, that kind of... I don't exactly know what it is, but it kind of seems majestic level, and maybe it's the artwork. I just want to preface that on pretty much all of these cards. I think the artwork is fantastic, but sometimes it doesn't quite feel legendary. Like it feels maybe a bit more majestic, and I don't know what it is. There's something about the artwork that just feels a little... Maybe it's not focusing too much on... I mean, it is focusing on the chest piece itself, the armor, but there's something about it that just doesn't seem as focused as it should be. Maybe the background is a bit too in focus, but I don't know. That's just probably the only thing on it that I would say isn't quite up to legendary standard. And I know it's also a balancing thing as well, but temper also doesn't seem like a legendary keyword. Normally legendaries would be something like Battle Worn or just straight up break. But yeah, I'd still probably call it legendary, but it's just a little something about it that I'm not sure. I don't know. I feel like maybe it could do a bit more. Maybe it's just because Bolton isn't as good as he could be, but yeah. That's my opinion.
Okay. I'm pretty pretty close actually. So Soulbond Resolve, I'm like 50-50 right now, and I guess I'll probably come to my verdict as I talk through this. So I think the mechanic is cool and like unique for the design space, and I think that for me personally is something that does tie into like a card being legendary, even if it's not a great mechanic. Is like, is it something weird or something they've never done before? And that for me elevates it. Oh, but like you said, it does feel kind of like a majestic, and maybe it is just because of like the bolt and power level. Maybe it is just because it's a way to charge on your opponent's turn, but that doesn't actively like, you know, give you a lot of like the aggressive charge buffs that you normally would when you're attacking.
Yeah.
You know, all those cards that are like, if you've charged this turn, do X or whatever. It does help the maybe one card that cares about charging on your opponent's turn. I think there is a banner that cares about like when you block with it, if you've charged, you do a thing. Yeah, this is also you talked about it with the first card. This is also a chess piece that doesn't do anything with resources. It literally only blocks. That's all it does. It blocks and then puts a card. You know, it's like card disadvantage, right? It puts a card into your soul. It charges into your soul. You don't have to. It's a May. The fact that it has temper means you can only do it twice. So it's also very limited. It's only like a 2-shot thing. And a lot of legendaries, in my opinion, maybe this is just being, you know, spoiled from the first couple Flesh and Blood sets, are cards that you can use multiple times through. Either you use them multiple times throughout the course of the game, or their impact is so big that it changes how the game is played, or like it's warped around it. A good example of that would be like a Carrion Husk, right? You only use Carrion Husk once, but it's such a huge impact that it alters how people play. So Soulbond Resolve, I'm gonna give it a legend, but that's like a very trepidatious one, just because it does feel kind of like a majestic, but the selling factor for me is the fact that this is a really unique thing. This is the only way to charge on your opponent's turn, and because of that, it gets the legend status for me. Here's the big caveat: if there was another way to charge on your opponent's turn, this would get a majestic. This would just get like a loss for me. But because it is a very unique mechanic, it barely gets it. It barely gets it. You know, if it was like, you know, a scale. And it's like, you know, there's the 50-50 side, and if you go to 51, it's a legend. If you go to 49, it's a loss. It is a 51, right, for me.
Yeah, for sure.
So
and I guess one way that I like to judge whether or not I feel like a card is legendary or not, I think it was Richard Garfield, the creator of Magic the Gathering. Back in the day, I remember he said something along the lines of commons and rares and uncommons were meant to be sort of the meat and potatoes of your deck, and then for Magic, the mythics, or I guess back in the day it would have been rares, are meant to be the cards that, while not necessarily powerful, have a very unique effect that can change the way that you want to build your deck. So yeah, I think Soulbond Resolve doesn't quite do that, but it is quite a unique effect. So yeah, as you said, I do think it just ekes in legend on that.
Yeah, for me it's solely because...
Very hesitant legend.
Yeah, solely because of the fact that it's a unique effect. All right, next up we have... Okay, well, this is a pretty... We'll talk about it. This is Levi Redeemed, and then also Blasphephet Levi Consumed. I literally posted like a 10-minute video gushing about how much I love this card. And then when Brian Gottlieb, one of the designers for Flesh and Blood, was on the Living Legends podcast, I also like gushed to him about this card. So I'm going to go over it really quickly. I think this is an immediate legend. Not only that, I think this is one of the most interesting cards they've ever made. I think it's also one of the cards that cracks Flesh and Blood design open in a way that has never really been done before. It is the first of a new card type. This is a demi-hero. It's the first of a card that lets you play it from essentially outside the game, right? You play this card from your inventory or your sideboard, right? So like it's super mechanically unique. It is very, very flashy. The art is absolutely incredible for both sides. We have the Steve Argyle artwork for Levi Redeemed, and then for Blasphephet Levi Consumed, we have Wishnu Tan, who's a very well-known Flesh and Blood artist who did like Reyna and a bunch of well-known Flesh and Blood cards, including, I believe, the original. Did he also do the original Levi? I think he might have also done the original Levi as well.
Possibly. I do know that he did the Young Viceroy as well. So
I should know. I have a signed copy of the original Levi. But yeah, I think this card, and this is what I said in both times I've talked about this before. Even if this card sucked, it would be my favorite card from Dusk Till Dawn. Even if it was terrible, it would be a slam dunk home run card for me. And turns out it's also not terrible. It is very, very good, and almost, I don't want to say single-handedly makes Levi like playable, but does a lot of work to making Levi great. And then for Blasphemous Levi Consumed, this reminds me of one of my favorite cards of all time from any card game. It reminds me of a card called Yawgmoth's Will from Magic the Gathering, which is a absolutely like legendary card in the truest sense. And yeah, I can't help but like just see the design of Blasphemous Levi Consumed and see like, you know, James White and Brian Gottlieb designing this card, and I'm like, I see you. I see you. You like your Yogg Will in here. So, oh, and then also I didn't talk about the flavor. So, the flavor is super, super good. Both cards care about the number 13, and the number 13 is super relevant to both the story and how Levi Consumed just happens. I'm not going to spoil it too much, but it has to do with the original followers of the what is now known as the Apostate, or he's called the Apostate, right?
Yeah, so the Apostate is his current title.
Yeah. So the 13 is relevant to that because there are 13 of his followers that were basically murdered by the Solanian faithful, I guess you could say. And then they, you know, maybe they make a new appearance. Maybe you should go read some of the Dusk Till Dawn lore, and you'll see why that 13 is relevant. Especially if the 13 health from Blasphemous Levi Consumed is actually pretty funny. So, yeah, that's me just saying like this is like the biggest legend of all time. This is like the poster card for Legend and Lost, right? This is what a legendary card should be. And like I said, we're showing up the Marvel version of this, but even though the legendary version of it is non-foil, still absolute slam dunk legend. So that's my verdict on Levi Redeemed. How about you, Kel?
Yeah, I agree on pretty much all of your points there. I guess I'll go over the good points before I go over a concern I have with this type of card. So one thing I've noticed that LSS does is that anytime a card is legendary, like has the actual keyword of legendary on it, it normally has some sort of significance to the story and the lore. And this card definitely does. I mean, this focuses extremely heavily on Levi and her battle against Blasmafet, the Emperor that she made a pact with to get her powers. The artwork is just stunning, especially Levi Redeemed is definitely my favorite side, I would say. Just because it's this new evolution of Levi. The abilities on both sides are extremely unique. As you said, nothing else in the game does this. This is our first demi-hero as well. This reminds me a lot of... I forgot what they were called in Hearthstone. You might be able to remind me about those particular hero cards that you'd play and it would replace your hero. I always loved things like that, where it's like a mid-game switch-up. It was a literal mechanic and flavor switch-up for your hero, which is just
you face
really
Draxus, cool. Eridar, Lord of the Burning Legion.
Burning Legion.
Yeah.
Exactly. So yeah, in all of those regards, I'll get my rating out of the way. It's 100%, 110%. This is definitely worthy of the legendary title. My only concern is that I feel that LSS has to be very careful printing these types of cards. Not specifically demi-heroes, but a card that is designed in such a way, because others might have different opinions, but I personally feel that if I were to play Levi, if I didn't have this card, it's not worth playing her. And I think that's kind of dangerous. The fact that the viability of a hero like so heavily depends on a single card. is very concerning, especially because this card is legendary in rarity, which means it's harder to pull, higher price, obviously. I just don't want them to go down the route where single cards completely define whether or not you can play a hero. I think in this regard, it's okay, because Levi did get other support in Dusk Till Dawn that made her a lot better, and this card is basically a panic button in most senses. You kind of want to aim for the Blasmafet Levi consumed first, just because that will help you pump out so much more damage on a turn. And then you have Levi Redeemed to act as a panic button, where you accidentally go a bit too low, you can't trigger Blasmafet Levi consumed, so you just pop on Redeemed, and now you're protected from your blood debt for the rest of the game. Yeah, I just want them to be very careful with this design, but I absolutely love it. I can't wait to see what else they do with demi heroes, whether or not we get maybe some sort of demi hero for, say, like Dorinthia. We did see in the story of Morlock Hill, she kind of became, I guess, a light warrior. She got empowered by the light, and I could totally see that being put onto a card. This design of card is the perfect synergy between flavor and function, which is highly important in a card game, at least to me anyway. Some people don't care about flavor, but I really do, so that's my opinion on this card. It's very, very good, almost too good, but yeah.
Yeah, I won't go super into it, but I agree, and I think one of the reasons why this is a must-play card for Leviah is that Leviah just was a very weak hero, right? She's one of the only heroes in the game that doesn't have a buff. Like, it doesn't have an ability that makes her stronger, right? There's an inherent assumption that her card pool is so strong that she deserves to have her mechanic is to not die from her own card pool. Whereas, like, you look at something like Chain or just any other hero in the game, even like Dash, which doesn't actually have like a ongoing effect. They have the once at the start of the game effect, where Leviah just is like, my ability is to not die from my own stuff. So I'm not sure if this is just like just with them correcting the hero, right? And hopefully demi heroes in the future are more I don't want to say situational, but they give you the option to expand your play rather than make your play that already exists not like be bad, I guess.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
Yeah, I agree. We'll have to see what the next iteration of Demi Hero is going to be. I think that'll be a very big telling part, because I don't think there are any other heroes in the game currently. Well, there's some, but Levi was like the big one, where it's just like her ability is to not die from her own effects. So, okay.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. So that's that. We both legend from Leviah, because of course. Next up, okay. You're going to start this one, because I started the last one. The next card is Scowling Fleshbag.
Yes. So, in the words of Bill from the Spike Feeders, a good friend of ours, this card is amazing. It is such a clean design for a card. As Bill has also said, 6 words on this card, if you don't include reminder text as to what abilities do.
Yeah.
When this defends, Intimidate, Blade Break. That's it. Intimidate really has had no reason to not be an ability that could be used on your opponent's turn. And the fact that this is the first card that does this definitely makes it seem unique. I could definitely see them printing cards in the future that will intimidate on an opponent's turn. Maybe like some sort of defense reaction that doesn't block for much and you have to pay for it, but when you use it, it intimidates, which could interrupt an opponent's turn. Against certain decks, this is a nightmare to face. And
yes,
just having this in play from the start, sip is what people say, starts in play, stays in play. Mm-hmm. It changes the way that your opponent plays the game. It's very similar, as Bill has also said. Bill's very on point with these. like Mask of Momentum, it changes how your opponent plays without even having to do anything, just simply because it's an option to you. I mean, the flavor of it is perfect as well. The fact that this brute guy is just scowling at someone, like, I could just imagine you put this in front and it's almost like, I guess flavor-wise, if you were to think about it in universe, you go to attack him and he just looks at you with this deadly stare, and it makes you falter, you know, hence the Intimidate. So I definitely think, even though it has very little words on it, just due to the fact that it's so unique, that it definitely deserves legendary. I think the artwork could be a little more focusing on the actual headpiece itself, but it kind of needs to have the guy there as well, scowling, hence the name Scowling Fleshbag. Yeah, I think the artwork could maybe be a little bit better, but, you know, I definitely think it's legendary. It deserves that. It's a very good card.
So I agree. You basically said exactly what I was going to say. The biggest thing for me is that this is a card that changes the way that people play the game. And I think that is one of the biggest factors for being a legendary card. Like you mentioned, Mask Momentum. I do like this a little bit more than Mask Momentum, in that this Mask Momentum alters the entire game until they're forced to block with it, where this one is just a one-time deal. But I think it is so powerful that until they actually block with the Scowling Fleshbag, it's going to alter how attacks are done. And you, as the attacker, you have to, like, calculate that, you know, are they going to block with Scowling Fleshbag in this turn, or not? And that is, like, there's, like, the threat of activation with this card, and that threat of activation actually goes a lot more than just, like, what the card actually does, because your opponent's gonna have to play around it, right? If you're playing with a Scowling Fleshbag, they have to know, like, that you can block with it at any time, and so they can't just make an attack that's bad into it. Otherwise, they might lose their entire turn. Because, like, against certain classes, against, like, Uzuri, for example, you can't do, like, the 2-card Uzuri thing with Scowling Fleshbag. If you come in with your stealth card and they fleshbag it right off the bat, your card's gone. Like, you can't do the swap. So you have to like tactically, like, plan around that, either having two more cards in your hand, so that's a 3-card attack, or you know, just run it out and bite the bullet. So I really like this card. As an Uzuri player myself, this card's going to get me often, especially since I play against a lot of brutes. I want to point out the name. The name of the card is excellent. Scowling Fleshbag is just a really, really good, like, card name. So yeah, I agree. I think this one is also a legend, because it's super clean, and it, like, just alters the way people play the game. So yeah,
I definitely think good players that are versing someone using this will try and get them to break it as soon as possible.
Yeah. Yep.
And then good players who are using this will know to hold off on doing so for as long as possible. So yep. I love the mind games behind it. It's great.
Yeah, this is a good one. All right, next up we have... Okay, so I'm going to start this one. This is Iron Song Versus. So, Iron Song Versus is... Alright, I'm just going to go ahead and say, I think this is probably one of the most underwhelming legendary cards in the set, for multiple reasons. We already mentioned this before, but Temper just doesn't really feel like a legendary mechanic, especially when Warrior already has good, like, really good arm equipment that, you know, is legendary, that has what is it called? Battle Worn. It has Battle Worn.
Yeah.
And this one also is just kind of like, I don't know, like, there's something about it. It doesn't seem, like, super powerful, right? It doesn't immediately scream like oh, this is legendary. In fact, it kind of, like, mimics an old legendary. It kind of, like, reminds me of Braveforge Bracers to some degree, because they have sort of similar effects, because Braveforge Bracers gives your next attack +1. A Courage token also pumps up attacks. So it's like, It's like this card that's mimicking an old legendary. For me, it just doesn't get there. It doesn't do anything super unique. The art's pretty cool. And I do like the name Iron Song Versus. You know, it's definitely leaning into the Dorinthia flavor, especially with like Dorinthia on the art. But this is going to be my first loss of the show here, for a lot of reasons, right? Why doesn't this have Battle Worn? Like, this feels like this feels like a majestic to me. Like, this feels like this could be a majestic. Maybe it's not a majestic because the first ability you can use multiple times, right? So you can actually use the first ability multiple times, which I think is like the only saving grace for this card. But even then, it's just like it costs a resource. It's not a reaction, so it's not like a reaction when the thing hits. You get it. It's an action, so your opponent can see it coming. And it still has to hit too. So it's like it doesn't even help you hit. Like it's like you have to pump up the attack already to even get the trigger. I don't know. Like I said, this one is a loss for me. So yeah.
Yeah. I'm gonna agree with you on most of those. I'm trying to think where you would use this card over Braveforge Braces. And the only thing I can really think is if you want to play some sort of tall warrior where you're only attacking once.
Well,
so whether you play like a Battle Axe sort of like deck.
Yeah.
Because Braveforge Braces, you need to have attacked in order to activate its +1.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're not attacking multiple times, that ability is kind of useless. And you might as well run, I guess, Iron Song Versus in that regard, because it having temper doesn't really change anything. It just means it goes away once it hits 0, whereas Braveforge Braces doesn't. But if you're not using the ability in Braveforge, you might as well use something that could be used on, a tall hit. I don't know. It just feels like to call it Iron Song Versus as well, but have it not really help Dawnblade. It kind of doesn't make too much sense, because Braveforge Braces would help Dawnblade more. Like when you're playing Dawnblade, you want to make sure at all costs that your Dawnblade hits, and this doesn't help it hit on the turn that you activate it. It helps like the next turn, or I guess if you were to swing twice, right? But at that point, you might as well be playing Braveforge. It sticks around.
Well, it only works if the first one has hit to begin with, right? So it doesn't actually help you hit like almost at all, because if they fully block the first one, then you don't actually get the courage token to help with the second hit. So it's like it's also kind of like a win more card in that in that respect, where it's like you have to hit the first one anyway. And so if you've done them both, maybe this is a way to help you get the second hit, but also Braveforce Bracers does that already. So it's like
yeah, I'm also thinking of it in a way where I'm trying to think best case scenario just to try help this card out, where you would keep the courage token for your next turn.
I think the axe situation is that, because like I do have a weird janky deck that I call Big Axe Dorinthia, and this might make it into Big Axe Dorinthia, but it's already super resource intensive because axes cost like a ton to swing with, and so like, what are you paying, like 4 before any buffs to do Iron Song Versus into your axe?
I just realized something as well. This only affects swords. It doesn't affect axes.
Yeah, that's your next sword
so
attack.
It's completely useless.
No.
So the only way I could see this possibly seeing any use is that we have a great sword coming at some point. That'd where you want to go very tall, one hit, has some sort of ability that helps evade blocking. I don't know. It's just it's not even that unique of an effect, because other cards can create courage tokens for you. More specifically, I guess, in Bolton. And like just the +1, that's not enough. I'm kind of disappointed in general, I guess, with courage tokens. I was really hoping that they were going to be similar to Courage of Bladehold, hence the name, where it makes your next sword attack cost 1 less, which would have been amazing.
That's what a lot of people thought it would be, but I predicted on the Living Legends podcast, I was like, it's probably just going to be like a buff, like some sort of buff.
Yeah.
Turns out it's just like a buff. Yeah.
I think if maybe courage tokens were better, it would be better, but yeah, it's just disappointing.
All right, so that is our first loss, unanimous on the Iron Song versus. Next up, we have a card that might not fare much better. We'll see. You'll take the lead on this one. This is the Diadem of Dream State.
Okay. For a long time now, since I guess Dynasty, or even I guess a bit before that, there have been cards that have been printed for Illusionist that care about being broken. And I've always thought that at some point we're going to get an Illusionist hero that cares about having their stuff broken. So maybe their ability is something along the lines of you can maybe buff a defending attack action card's power using the hero ability, so you purposely pop it, which seems kind of bad, but maybe you get some sort of strong ability from it. Ward... The downside to Ward is the fact that it's not optional. If Ward was optional, something like this would be a lot better. The thing that really pulls this card back is the fact that it has Ward 2, and you cannot turn that off. So, you can obviously get a Ponder token when this breaks, or another card, non-token permanent with Ward gets destroyed. You can get a Ponder token, but you have to pay for it as well, which... When it breaks, it's generally going to be on your opponent's turn. So therefore, any card that you pitch to pay for it, any extra floating resources that you've got, won't carry over into your turn. You can't turn them into an attack.
You can't even block with it because it's a Ponder token, so you don't actually draw the card until the end of your next turn.
Next turn.
Like,
yep.
Here's the big thing for me. I'll let you finish, but the big thing for me is like, why doesn't this just like draw you a card? You have to pay one anyway into this. Like, if it's already once per turn, right? So you can't actually get multiple Ponder tokens anyway. Why doesn't it just draw you a card?
Oh, it is once per turn. I didn't even realize that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's. I think an effect like this really should be on a Majestic, because I think Majestic rarity for equipment is the rarity where abilities that aren't super obviously strong or maybe require a bit of setup, that's where those abilities live. Things like Celestial Kimono, which also cares about ward stuff breaking, getting you a resource point. That was Majestic. And yeah, just everything about this card just really screams not good. I mean, it might be good in the future, but even if it is good in the future, I just don't think the effect is strong enough to even warrant it being a legendary.
And so, I should also note, too, that this is also only affecting non-token permanents, so it doesn't affect your Spectral Shield, which does have Ward, by the way. The Spectral Shield has been errated to have Ward. So if you look at the new tokens, Spectral Shields do say Ward 1, instead of the old way, it just kind of like wrote it out. But this card does not work with them because it only works with non-tokens as well. So it has to be like another piece of equipment like the Celestial Kimono or like one of your angels. And so like you're losing, I don't know, like you're getting, I don't know. The fact that you have to pay a resource into this is like the big one, right? This is not card advantage. It's not raw card advantage unless I guess you have like a tunic where you can just get the resource here. It's like card filtering, but you can't even immediately use the card that you filtered. Like you can't block with the card that you filtered.
Yeah.
So
for sure.
Yeah.
Maybe if it said something along the lines of, you may pay one if you do at the beginning of your turn draw a card. That way you start the turn with a card and you've cycled the one that you've pitched. That would probably be a bit better, but yeah, it's just...
This also makes... I was gonna say, it also makes other Ponder effects, like, bad, too. Because, like, stacking Ponder tokens is just generally not great. You have diminishing returns after the first one. Because the whole power behind Ponder is that it doesn't actively draw you a card, but what it does do is it lets you put a card into your arsenal on a turn where you might not have been able to put a card in your arsenal. And and so having like multiple ponders trigger just gives you, I guess, options on that. But yeah.
Yeah, I will say in terms of flavor, I think it is fairly on point. I like the whole idea of dream state and pondering. I do really like the flavor of ponder tokens in general, just the whole sort of thinking and knowledge, and how in Flesh and Blood, cards and card advantage and card drawing is a hero's way of using knowledge. Because realistically, that's what your deck of cards is. It's the knowledge of all the attacks and different ways to sort of fight your opponents that you're actually drawing into. So I think flavor-wise, it's pretty good. The art's pretty cool.
I'm a big fan of the artist. The artist does like beautiful work, and I love this art in particular. I'm showing the extended art here, and you can see like it is very like dreamlike. You have like a jellyfish kind of like flying around in the background. It looks very otherworldly or even alien. I think the art is very, very cool. But the effect is very underwhelming, and this feels like it could, like you said, this feels like it could be a majestic. And also I feel that ponder tokens, at least currently, feel like a majestic power level mechanic, right? You have like your stuff like your codices from Outsiders, right? That all just generate a ponder, and you don't even have to jump through hoops. You just get it, right? And this one you have to jump through hoops, and you have to like carefully make sure this card doesn't get this, destroyed or popped, right? Because this one also has ward, so you have to like protect it, right? You can't just this is a card. This is not a card where you're like, okay, I just take the 4, take the 3, whatever. Like if you do that, this card immediately gets destroyed. And some of the best legendaries cards that I consider to be actually like legendary hits are legendaries that once either change the way the game is played, or they like give you incremental value over the course of a game. And this one might, but man, you're burning through all your resources to do this. Like to keep this alive, you have to take 0 damage, basically. Because if you take any damage at all, like this is gone, because you wouldn't have taken the damage at the ward will pop. So yeah, I don't know. For me personally, this is a loss, sadly.
Same. And I will also say as well, Vincent hoses this card.
Yeah, for sure, yeah.
Unpreventable rune chant, anything you've got with ward, and if you're playing this card, you kind of want to have a lot of ward things. Yeah. Anything with ward is just immediately gone. They just hose your entire ward collection. It's all gone. So.
Yeah, I can imagine you walking up like with your Diadem Dream State, your kimono, and you're like, okay, I'm going to do this like angel ward synergy to make this wall, and then a single rune chant with Vincent, poop, just plows through all of it. Yeah. So unfortunately, beautiful card though. And then the final legendary before we get. Oh no, we have 2 more legendaries. So this one is actually a reprint. So this is Crown of Providence. So let me go over Crown of Providence. Reprints will have a little bit of a different equity, I think, in this conversation, because they're not a brand new card. It's a card that already exists, and it's reprinted for a reason. And the reason it's reprinted is because it is a very powerful card, and it's a card that is played in almost every deck that doesn't have like a class-specific helm that needs it, right? Like, I've even seen some Rangers run Crown of Providence. I've seen Riptide run Crown of Providence, and that's kind of crazy because Rangers are like the hat class, right? They're the class that cares about hats the most. So like Crown of Providence itself, if we were judging it based on the set that it originally came out, I think it would have been a more of a back and forth discussion for me personally, because this effect is not a flashy effect, it's just a very efficient effect. It's the same reason why Arcanite Skullcap got a lot of play. It's like Arcanite Skullcap is like one of the most boring cards. We'll talk about it.
It's very boring.
We'll talk about another legendary coming up too that's similar to that. But it's like just efficient, right? It's just yeah. So like Crown of Providence for me does get the legend just because it is very powerful, and just because it is a needed reprint that players just need, right? Like, but with that said, like, I don't know. part of me wants to say that like this could have originally been printed at like Majestic, even though it does do the cool like card pseudo advantage thing. You can call it like sort of advantage if you're dunking the card from your arsenal. From your hand, it just becomes like a sink below. But yeah, I think Crown of Providence is iconic enough now in Flesh and Blood that it gets the legend treatment from me. But overall, I feel like it's like kind of a boring effect, even if it is a strong effect. So that's where I'm coming from. It has Blade Break. Blade Break never feels great, but it's your one-time effect. It doesn't change the way people play the game all that much, like a Scowling Fleshbag does. Definitely less of a legend than Scowling Fleshbag, in my opinion. Art's really cool, but
yeah,
and it's also this is a minor nitpick. There are too many crown ofs, and when you're talking about the crowns outside, there's Crown of Providence and Crown of Dominion, and next time they make another crown of something, it'll make the waters even muddier. Because even when we're just casually talking with someone about the crowns, sometimes it's quite easy to mix up Crown of Providence and Crown of Dominion. Dominion is the one that gives you the gold token. Providence is the one that lets you sink below. But yeah, this is. So for me personally, this does get a legend, mostly backed on the card's real world history. Put it that way.
Yeah, for sure. Also, I believe Crown of Reflection.
Oh, yeah, this Crown of Reflection too.
Illusionist card.
Yeah.
So I was just going to have a look at that, but yeah, I mean, as you said, the effect is very boring, which for a legendary is a big kind of no-no. But just the fact that it's so powerful, though, kind of makes up for that fact. And I mean, realistically, it's an important crown. I mean, a crown of Providence. It's not as, I guess, it doesn't represent as much power as like a Crown of Dominion, which literally makes you royal.
Yeah.
But it's a crown nonetheless, and you can't really have a crown which is generally a one-of item not be legendary, right? Otherwise, you know, if everyone else had a Crown of Providence in the world, well then it's not really a Crown of Providence, is it? It's just a hat, you know. So
it's kind of funny that the whole mechanic of the card though is like, even though it's a crown that's meant to like, you know, crowns like, you know, symbolize authority. This authority is only useful when it's smashed. Like it's just it's just a funny thing. I don't know.
Yeah, for sure. But I think the effect does make sense for a headpiece. So in the same way that chess pieces are all about resource management, headpieces are all about card advantage, card filtering, intellect increase, that sort of thing. And this filters cards, which can be very handy during games. It's not. Personally, I don't think this card is as important as many people make it out to be, but it is still good, and it is still probably the best headpiece we have that's generic at the moment.
Yeah.
But if your class that you're playing already has a headpiece, it's probably just as good, if not maybe better than Crown of Providence. The only reason this card, I think, is seeing as much play as it is just the fact that it's a great, decent effect, blocks 2, and a lot of classes just don't really have that good of a headpiece. So
yeah,
but
like
yeah, I would still say legendary though.
It's a really replaceable legendary for me. Like it's one of the cards, like the second they print like a slightly better one or even maybe a more interesting one for a particular build, like this card just gets like cut, right? It's like not even like, I don't know, it doesn't feel like important. It's just like you run it because like it's the best one available. Like I run it in my Uzuri deck, and that's because Uzuri doesn't really care about buying back stuff, so I don't run the Mask of Perdition. So it's like this is like really my only option. So I'm just running it because I have to. And I think like you said, that's just kind of like a thing that like a lot of classes do with this card. It's just you just run it because you have to. You don't have any other options. I feel like when more options are available, this card gets less important in terms of like playability. So
for sure. And this might shock a lot of people. I don't have a Crown of Providence. I have an Arcanite Skullcap, and I run that in my decks as a replacement for this, and I don't feel like I'm missing out on much. Yeah. I would prefer to have a Crown of Providence, but I make do with what I got, and I don't think it affects my games really that much, if at all. So,
yep. So, yeah. This is another one that we both agree on, a legend. But this is a card that's resting on its own laurels, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Last legendary before we get to the Fabled card, we have Dyadic Carapace. So take it away, Kale.
Just from what you've kind of hinted at, I think this will be the one card that we do not agree on. I am going to straight up say that I think this is worthy of being legendary. Even though its effects seem very boring. So I don't think it's unique simply because of each of its effects. I think it's unique because it's so flexible as an option. I mean, Arcane Barrier 2, Temper that blocks for 2, so you can block a total of 3 if you don't need the Arcane Barrier. I mean, that's the most you can block on a chess piece for Runeblade. As far as I can tell. Yes.
Well, unless you're Chain or Vincent.
Unless you're, yeah. Then you're using Carrion Husk, but I guess for Viscera, I'm thinking Viscera because that's my main. So.
Oh well. Yeah.
But yeah, Arcane Barrier 2 is definitely relevant, especially with Rosetta Thorn at the moment still being around. And I guess in Wizard matchups as well, it can be very helpful if you're playing a slower sort of game. But where I think this card really succeeds is the flavor. So I also looked up the definition of dyadic, and dyadic describes the interaction between two things, which is so flavorful with what the card actually is. It's the dichotomy between physical and arcane, which is exactly what Runeblade is about. They're about weaving the two together. And if you even look at the artwork, the woman in the art is holding both a sword and a staff, which you might not be able to fully notice in the non-extended art version, but in the extended art you can clearly see that. And I just love the fact that it embodies flavor-wise exactly what a Runeblade is, and it does it so well that's why I think it's legendary. I do actually have one of these myself. I managed to pull it, not extended art unfortunately, and in many matchups playing Viscera, I honestly have a hard time deciding if I want to use Tunic or either Ironweave or this. It really depends on the matchup. If I really value extra block because the opponent has a lot of on hits that I want to prevent, I will oftentimes run Dyadic Carapace. Especially if, they're a wizard or a Runeblade. So that's my opinion on it. And plus the artwork is awesome. I know a lot of people seeing the figure in the artwork are going to say, like they do anytime they see artwork with a really cool figure in it, they're going to say, oh, I really want that to be a new hero. I don't think she will, but she does look really cool. So yeah, that's my opinion on it. So I'm interested to see what you think of it.
Yeah, so I agree with most of what you said, but then also I'm not sure if it should be legendary. So I really love the artwork. First of all, the artwork is fantastic. It actually kind of looks like a World of Warcraft character, but not in a bad way. Not in a bad way. She looks really cool, and it's one of the, I think for me, like the biggest selling point of the card. For me personally, the art looks very, very cool. And if you see this in cold foil, like the extended art, in person, it looks very, very, very cool. I do like the functionality of the card, but for the same reasons as why I would probably give Arcanite Skullcap a loss, I would probably give this one a loss too. It just doesn't feel exciting. It doesn't feel unique or flashy. And also, it doesn't do the thing where the chess piece, reduces your resources or anything. It just blocks. I mean, it's not a bad card. I think it's a great card, actually. And like Kel said, I think there are situations where you definitely, run this card. But where I think like things could have been like the script could have been flipped a little bit is that I compare this to other Runeblade chess pieces, and the one that sticks out to me most is Bloodsheath Skeleta, and I'm like, Skeleta is like a legendary level card.
Yeah.
And I feel like Skeleta in this could have been flipped. Like this could have been in Skeleta's place as a majestic, and then Skeleta would have been like a legendary, and that would have been felt right to me. So that's kind of where I am with it. It just doesn't have like that flashy, unique sense, even though it is fairly. It does have the duality here, and I do like that it has the duality, particularly for Runeblade. Like I like that it is specifically a Runeblade chess piece, and then Runeblades are all about the duality, and it does do that. The duality is actually kind of funny because it loses 1 point of flavor for me because of temper specifically, which makes it better than if it had Blade Break. But if it had Blade Break, it would have had the full 2 and 2 because this actually this actually technically blocks for 3 because you block for 2 and then you block for 1 with the temper. So it doesn't actually have like 2 and 2. It's more like 2 and 3. But that's just kind of like a minor, Melvin level nitpick kind of thing. So. Yeah, I think I am going to give this one a loss, even though I do like the card. It just doesn't feel like... I feel like it could have been like a majestic, right? If I saw this printed as a majestic, I'd be like, yeah, sure. Like, yeah. I wouldn't be like, why is this a majestic? It's so good. It needs to be a legendary. Like, yeah.
Yeah, I feel like this card will really embody, during this legendary or lost series, sort of what we truly value when it comes to a legendary. This is like the epitome of like where our differences are.
Yeah.
Because I find not necessarily super exciting or super unique to be legendary, while that is a good factor, but just how it fits into a class and its particular strategies also really matters to me, and flavor, of course. I mean, I run a lore channel, so I kind of have to. But yeah. No, I totally agree on a lot of your points, but for me, yeah, there's something about this card that just really tickles my fancy. So,
I mean, the art is very good.
Yeah.
I guess we'll see how we feel about the last card, which is the Fabled Light of Soul. So I think I'm starting off on this one, right? Because you did the Carapace first.
Yes. Yeah.
This is really interesting. So this is a card that I first had not a super great opinion of it, but my opinion actually changed the more I thought about it. And I think it changed over the course of just me talking about Light of Soul with Az and Bill on the Living Legends podcast. And I've come around to it. At first I was like, oh, this is pretty lackluster. But I do like the effect quite a bit. So, one, it's a gem. And I think gems are inherently kind of like, they're an inherent plus, because I think they have like this flavor. They harken back to the original Fabled cards. I think just gems in general I will like quite a bit. I just think they're cool, and I think they look cool, and they have this aura of mystique about them. I feel like they harken back to a lot of folks, especially if you like Magic. They remind me like just the image looks like a Moxen sort of. It just looks cool. And I like that it's yellow, right? Definitely like slightly less powerful than if it was blue, but I do like the yellow flavor because a lot of the classes that are light care about the yellow flavor, and it is the Light of Soul, and just being yellow fits with all of that card. I also like how the name has the word light in it, and it is a light resource. I just like the parallel there. And then the actual effect is interesting. Most Fabled effects have minor impacts on the game. The Heart of Fiendel is like the progenitor of this. You gain 1 life, but only if you have less life than your opponent, right? You don't always get it. And I also like that with this. You don't always get the thing. The biggest argument would be like comparing it to Eye of Ophidia, but Eye of Ophidia is kind of crazy in my opinion. Eye of Ophidia is like nuts. So I'm comparing this more to like Heart of Fyendal or something like Plague Hive, which is my personal favorite Fabled card. But yeah, I do kind of like this. A couple things that I find funny about this though is doesn't count as charging for Bolton. So when you put the card into your soul, doesn't actually count as charging for Bolton. So poor Bolton, I guess.
Yep.
Just another knock against like the charge mechanic, and it's kind of like pseudo card advantage, sort of like putting a card into your soul. Could be great for the heroes that really care about it. Um, so this one for me personally does get a hit. I do really like the Light of Soul. Um, I think it's flavorful. I like that it charges your soul, but only if it's a yellow card. Like it sounds like a downside, which technically it's a downside because it only does yellow, but the flavor's there, right? It only does it if it's yellow because soul only cares about the light and only cares about yellow pitch cards. So yeah, this is a win for me. I would say that this, in terms of like the scale of personally for Fabled cards, is like somewhere in the mid-ish, high-ish area, not the top, but it's like somewhere in there. It's not like at the back end, but it's like somewhere in the middle. I do like this quite a bit. So yeah,
Yeah.
legend for me, even though it's a Fabled.
Yeah. So first off, I'll say called it.
Yeah.
I was pretty certain that the Fable for this set was going to be Light of Soul or a piece of Soul. So I guess in terms of lore, it hasn't really been confirmed per se, but it seems fairly evident that all of the Fabled gems that we have seem to be either pieces of, or at the very least related to, the Aesir, which, for those of you who don't know, the Aesir are basically these very old, ancient, powerful beings. We don't know too much about them, but each of them seems to be the source of power or represent each of the talents that we know so far for Wraith. So light obviously comes from Soul. The Draconic talent comes from the Aesir of Flame, whose gem would be Blood of the Drakai, I think it was called.
Yep.
There's speculation that Fyendal and Ophidia are also Aesir. Fyendal being an Aesir in the Savage Lands, Ophidia being one for Mysteria. So I definitely think it's 100% on brand for a gem. It makes a lot of sense. In terms of its actual ability, I think it's pretty good. So you don't obviously want a Fable to be too good, because as per the nature of how rare they are, you don't want something this rare being almost mandatory. Yep. And some could argue that some Fables have come fairly close to that, such as Eye of Ophidia.
Eye of Ophidia is
the library.
gross.
Yeah, the Great Library of Solana as well. But this ability is still good. I think a lot of people just overlook it just because they think that putting cards into your soul isn't, like, it's not as flashy as one would hope. But for certain decks and strategies, that's very important, filling up your soul. Like, I can almost guarantee if you're a Bolton player, or I guess more so Bolton would probably want this card. But if you're a Bolton player, there's probably times where you're like, oh, I really want to use Bolton's ability to give this card go again, but I've only got this amount of cards in my soul. I wish I had, like, more. And, having to charge from hand is oftentimes a detriment. So this, not only pitching for 2, which is a decent amount, and obviously quite flavorful, you're not forced to put the top card into your soul if you don't want to. So in a way, it's kind of like a pseudo opt 1. You don't get to put the card on the bottom of your deck, but you can put it into your soul if it's yellow. So even if you don't put it into your soul because it's not yellow, you can see what's coming up, and that gives you information. Yeah, I just think everything about this card really does just scream, I guess in this case, Fable, rather than Legendary. It's a one-off item, a gem. It has the Legendary keyword, so you can only have one in your deck, which is obviously Legendary, hence the name. Yeah, I think it's good, but not so good that it's a problem. I think this is the perfect power level for a gem. Yeah, all around, I think this is a, A+ design. So
Also, I've opened up more Light of Souls than I have some of the Majestics from the set. The pull rates are weird in Dust Till Dawn, so I've opened up more than this, by the way. I opened up technically 4 because I opened up 1 for a supporter as well. So
Wow.
it's actually very weird. And I've opened up 1 Slithering Shadowpede and 3 Light of Souls, just to tell you the weirdness of the pulls. One of those
is calling to you.
yeah, right. One of those is cold foil too. But I think personally speaking, it would be pretty hard for them to miss on a gem. I'm not even sure the criteria that I would have for like them missing on a gem. I think gems are pretty, as long as they're like flavorful and kind of like encompass like what the source is, I guess you could say. I think they're pretty big slam dunks. Whenever we have the next landmark, I don't know. We'll talk about that when the time comes. I personally really like the landmarks, but we'll see when the time comes. So yeah, going over that roughly. Let's see. We both said Legend for Emperion Rapture. We gave Soulbond Resolve Legend, but for me it was like really close.
For sure.
So it's two Legend. Levi Redeemed was a slam dunk, so that's 3 Legend. Fleshbag was 4. I think this is a set that more Legend than loss. Iron Song Versus is our first loss, so that's 4 and 1. Diadem Dream State was a second loss, so that's 4 and 2. Crown of Providence, Legend 2, so that's 5 and 2. Dyadic Carapace is where we had a little bit of a difference, so 6 and 2 for me, and 6 and 2 for you, and 5 and 3 for me, and then Light of Soul. So 6 and 3 or 7 and 2, I think. Math. So
math is hard.
Math just in my head. So overall, I would say that our verdict is, I guess, even though this differs by 1 number, our verdict is unanimous Legend for the set. Once again, we're not talking about, we do not factor in the financial value of any of these cards at all. Whether or not a card is $10 or $100 doesn't matter for this. So yeah, that's the new show. This one went on a lot longer than I thought it would. I was like, yeah, it might be
a lot to say.
I was like, yeah, it might be like 10 minutes. It's like close to an hour. So yeah, let us know in the comments down below if you like this series. Folks who have been in the TCG space for a very long time might recognize a format similar to this from an old show that I used to watch called Hit or Myth, and that's kind of where I got the idea. And I think bringing it to Flesh and Blood could be really fun, and it's something that I would like to do every new set. And yeah, I think it's just a fun way to talk about the cards and to present them in a interesting way. I think it's like, I like to think of it as like it's like a top 5 list, but like more of a discussion format rather than just like, here's the top 5 cards or whatever.
For sure.
So yeah, that's gonna be that. Let us know what you think. If you'd like to hear more of Kale, he does have a YouTube channel called Dead Summer Art where he does like really high quality edited stuff. So you should definitely go subscribe. I should have a link in the description down below. And Kale, if you'd like to say anything else, you are free to take it away before we bid everyone adieu.
Yeah, I think at least in terms of legendaries for Dusk Till Dawn, pretty good. Some parts where I think they could have improved, but I think overall, if you pull a legendary in this set, for the most part, depending on what you pull, you're probably going to be very happy. So that's kind of the main goal that LSS should strive for with legendaries, is that people are happy when you pull them. So regardless of their price. So yeah.
My one other thing that I wanted to mention to the audience, if you're listening this far, is should we include Marvels in the discussion? That's the one thing I wasn't sure of. Let us know in the comments down below if you'd like us to include Marvels as well, and whether or not we should feel that they should be Marvel. I think that's a little bit different because Marvels just feel like a fun little alternate version of a thing, right? And I feel like there's Well, we can talk about it. Once again, let us know what you think. I think we could talk about it, whether or not a card feels like it should be a Marvel, right? I think some definitely should. Like the Angels, in my opinion, all feel great for this, just like the Dragons did. Levia also feels great. In fact, I would even say the one Embra from the set. Oh my God, it's the card that I spoiled. I can't even. Yeah, I was gonna say I can't believe I forgot it. It's
You
like,
spoiled it.
I spoiled Nazareth. I think Nazareth is also a big one. So, but yeah, let us know if you'd like us to talk about that as well. So, I think that's about that. Once again, this is like an hour long. So, thanks so much for watching. If you've been watching the whole time, well, appreciate it. And we'll see you next time for Bright Lights.